Democrats could have sent anyone. They could have sent Hunter Biden. They could have sent Joe Biden. They could have sent Rob Walker. They could have sent Devin Archer. The Democrats could have sought any person to come and refute the direct evidence backed up by bank statements, backed up by calendar entries, backed up by emails, backed up by text messages. And who did the Democrats send to clear the name of Joe and Hunter Biden? They sent Lev Parnas. Lev Parnas, who was charged with enough crimes and violating our campaign finance laws to, serve 50 years, but he gets 4 months. The fraud he committed wasn't just on our election system by plowing Russian money, it was also a fraud on his own investors who didn't get it.
While we're on Mr. Gaetz, he seemed to be upset about a couple different things. One was fraud, which was fascinating to me, given that his hero, Donald Trump, has just been convicted civilly of bank and insurance fraud in New York in a civil case, and now owes, I think it's $454 million, unless that's gone up with interest. I think he's having a hard time making that, but I'm sure that Mr. Gaetz's constituents will help him out as they're shaking down Republican voters. You can pay either for Donald Trump's criminal lawyers or his civil lawyers. That's the big political choice, I suppose. So today, we revisit the fruitless testimony of 2 more fading star witnesses who have failed to testify to any presidential wrongdoing, much less evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors. Both of the majority witnesses are frustrated would-be business partners of Hunter Biden, who tried to leverage the Biden name, or the Biden brand, as they keep calling it. But they never got any business off the ground for reasons that will become painfully obvious to anyone watching the proceedings today.
It is past time we put America and Americans first. Joe Biden and his regime are shelling out benefits to illegal immigrants like Oprah Winfrey on her show. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone gets recognized, even if you're here illegally. In New York, aliens are receiving $53 million in free prepaid debit cards. In Denver, Colorado, aliens get 6 free months of housing. And now they want to hand them seats in Congress to buy their lifelong allegiance to the Democrat Party. Americans deserve to have their voices fully represented, not diluted by illegal aliens. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you kindly, and it's always delightful to hear my friend from Colorado speak. One thing that I do want to point out, however, because there might be some students in the gallery today, is that there can be no illegal aliens and there can be no green card holders in Congress, because the Constitution very clearly specifies that you must have been a citizen for 7 years before you run for the House, and you must have been a citizen for 9 years before you run for the Senate, and you must be a born U.S. citizen in order to run for president of the United States, which some of the historians, as I think I mentioned before, attribute to Thomas Jefferson trying to write Alexander Hamilton out of the presidential sweepstakes. In any event, I think that my colleagues should probably relax with some of the hyperbole and exaggeration here. After all we're saying is let's keep doing what we've done since 1790 in the country. This is the way that the census and the reapportionment have always been run in the United States of America, and what they're proposing is obviously a radical departure from what the Constitution ordains.
In my few short years serving the 4th District of South Carolina in Congress, I've watched a once proud city succumb to violent crime, vagrancy, and fall into lawlessness. There are many factors at play here, but the bottom line is this. I want to, in good faith, tell parents from my district that it's safe for the kids to come visit the nation's capital on their school trip. But right now, I can't do that. I actually do the exact opposite when people come to my office. I tell them that D.C. is not safe. They should take Ubers. We have to respect the rule of law. We have to respect law enforcement. We have to fund law enforcement. We should have 3,000 law enforcement officers in Washington, D.C. You're going to be down to 1,500 here shortly because of the way that the city council treats law enforcement. It is unacceptable.
The gentleman from South Carolina lectured the people of Washington, D.C. about criminal incidents taking place here. Of course, there are criminal incidents taking place also in South Carolina. in the exact same way. But how about something that took place even closer to home? How about the violent mob insurrection where a mob incited by the ex-president violently assaulted Capitol Police officers and Metropolitan Police Department officers who were forced to deploy to the Capitol, and nearly 150 of them ended up brutalized, wounded, and hospitalized after being hit over the head or in the chest or stabbed or speared by steel pipes, Confederate battle flags, Trump flags, and American flags, shamefully. And yet we have the ex-president and a number of people who are his sycophants over on that side of the aisle describing people who are in jail for that, a majority of them having pled guilty for those offenses, the others convicted after due process of law, calling those people hostages. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist or a criminal entity like Hamas and held for a financial or a political ransom. And yet, shamefully, there are people on that side of the aisle who call the prisoners who've been convicted after having been given every aspect of American due process and right to counsel, they're calling them hostages or political prisoners, like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela. That's where they've come to. So they want to denounce a criminal event that happened 6 blocks away. What about the massive criminal event, the most massive criminal event in the history of the nation's capital that came right into this chamber, forcing the senators and the representatives to flee? And they won't say a word about it, and yet they get up and they denounce lawlessness. And they won't even denounce lawlessness that comes right into the Congress and the Capitol of the United States.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very kindly. With any luck, today marks the end of perhaps the most spectacular failure in the history of congressional investigations, the effort to find a high crime or misdemeanor committed by Joe Biden and then to impeach him for it. In prior hilarious episodes of this long-running madcap series, America got to see the following. 1, nearly 20 fact witnesses who could not identify a single act of wrongdoing by President Biden, much less a high crime and misdemeanor, and who overwhelmingly testified that Biden was not involved in any of his family's business adventures. 2, 3 expert witnesses called by the majority itself who said nothing that they had seen in the tens of thousands of pages of documents adduced by the majority even remotely approached the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. Bank records which show exactly what all the witnesses told us, that Joe Biden was not involved in his family members' businesses. Repeated voyeuristic displays of pornographic images by the majority, completely irrelevant to any conceivable legislative or investigative purpose. A star witness, Gal Luft, who turned out to be a Chinese agent and an illegal arms trafficker on the run from American justice. And the key piece of evidence, which launched the entire zany goose chase, an FD 1023 form in which the FBI duly recorded a completely fictional tip about a $5 million bribe to Vice President Biden, peddled by Alex Smirnoff, who has been criminally indicted by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, Special Counsel David Weiss, for felony counts of systematically lying to the FBI and constructing a false record about Joe Biden, and now sits in jail in California as a flight risk while the world studies his long-standing and extensive ties to Russian intelligence. Both of the majority witnesses are frustrated would-be business partners of Hunter Biden, who tried to leverage the Biden name, or the Biden brand, as they keep calling it. But they never got any business off the ground for reasons that will become painfully obvious to anyone watching the proceedings today. Even Hunter Biden, laboring at the time under a serious substance abuse addiction, could tell these were not the type of people he should be doing business with. So rather than representing the Biden brand, which was their ardent wish, they now show up today as loyal servants of Trump world, each of them proudly represented by their very own former Trump White House attorney. The first, is Mr. Bobulinski, the bitterly disappointed wannabe Hunter business partner whose famously litigious history includes unsuccessfully suing his own dying father's charity for nearly $1 million, and just last month suing Cassidy Hutchinson for $10 million after she reported that Mr. Bobulinski, wearing a ski mask, met with Mark Meadows, which Ms. Hutchinson is now backed up with actual documentary photographic evidence, something in very short supply in this investigation. Mr. Bobulinski made his hazy allegations against the Bidens public for the first time at a press conference choreographed by the Trump for President campaign, which provided him a venue, a gaggle of journalists, and even a dress shirt that they went out and bought for him to wear to the event.
Mr. Parnas, how much time did you spend in prison? 4 months. But
4 months.
But you were indicted for crimes that could have resulted in you spending 50 years in prison, right?
Right, they were false crimes. The judge saw through it.
Well, you went to trial and you were convicted, right?
I went to trial, correct.
And the crime was that you were trying to acquire marijuana licenses, and you took money from a Russian oligarch, and you tried to use that money to go give political donations and do what you had to do to acquire marijuana licenses. Is that about right?
That's what the crime was. That's what the indictment was. Yeah.
Right. So it sounds like everyone here today, the only one working for a Russian oligarch was you. Right? I mean,
yeah, it was.
I just heard you.
I mean, it's public information.
Yeah, no, I just heard you wax
Gaetz.
poetic.
I got paid $200,000. You know how much I got paid.
You were really worried about our democracy, and you were here to warn us. But you were working for a Russian oligarch,
on
wanting
behalf
to
of
get
President
marijuana
Trump.
licenses. But then you didn't even do it. The fraud you committed against the Russian oligarch was that instead you spent the money on yourself. So, like, was that what you were doing to fight against Russia's aggression?
That's a lie.
Just taking their money? Well, that's what you were convicted of.
No,
but instead of spending 50 years in prison, you got 4 months. As this hearing continues, I look forward to hearing what Mr. Galanis thinks about how he was treated by the DOJ for telling the truth, as opposed to how you're treated for lying.
The DOJ didn't listen to the truth, because if they would listen to the
question,
truth, you
the
guys
question
would've been
Mr.
all in
Gaetz
jail.
had is
They
for
didn't want to hear
Mr.
the truth. You can't handle the truth, Matt Gaetz.
Look, well, the truth for you is taking money from Russians to buy marijuana businesses and then going to jail and then coming here to lie about Trump.
You should know better than anybody what
Gentlemen's time has
the DOJ is
expired.
about.
Chair
You
now.
should know better than anybody.
Gentlemen's time's expired.
So I guess, Mr. Bobulinski, as you hear Maxwell Frost, my colleague on the Democrat side, say that Mr. Parnas, fresh off of his prison time, is the most credible witness we've had to address these business dealings, what's your reaction to that?
I think it's laughable that the Democrats are asking Lev Parnas to weigh in on my credibility, a convicted felon that served jail time. I have an impeccable record. Now, he warned me earlier in this hearing that they're coming for me. I
didn't worry. I said just keep talking. You'll be there soon.
I look forward to that, Mr. Parnas.
Keep lying. You'll be there soon.
Well, and when
Is that a threat, Mr. Parnas?
No, it's just the truth.
No, did you say they were coming for me?
No, I said if you keep lying, you will end up in prison.
I'm not lying. You're the
Well,
one
then
who
if
was
you're not, you
lying.
have nothing to
You're the
scare.
one who went to prison
What am
for
I
lying.
lying for? Tell me what we're lying for, Mr. Bobulinski. You don't even know what you're talking about. What am I lying?
You went to
What is
prison
lying?
for lying and defrauding your
What am I
investors.
lying here? What am I lying here?
Oh, the list is
Go
long.
ahead,
We don't
go
have enough
ahead.
time. I
Exactly,
think Mr.
yeah.
Gaetz only has a minute.
I think you're a little scared, just like
So
Mr.
one
Gaetz.
crime-
Because Mr. Gaetz doesn't even ask a question. You're filibustering. I've been here for 6 hours, and not one of your committee members has asked me one question. You want to
Well,
hear
I
the
asked you-
truth?
hold on,
no,
hold
you
on,
haven't.
Mr.
No, no. You
I
wanna
asked a
ask
question about
Get
your
to the
illegal
truth.
business
I've been here for
dealings.
7 hours.
Mr. Bobulinski,
Ask me some questions.
fraud is a
Stop
crime, right?
filibustering. Go ahead. Ask
Correct. Fraud is a crime.
Fraud is a crime, and you observed fraud on the part of the Bidens, right?
I did. Crystal clear.
If you check out the Democrats' report, White House for Sale, how princes, prime ministers, and premiers paid off President Trump, you'll find that China actually gave more than $5 million to Donald Trump while he was president of the United States, in direct violation of the emoluments clause, which says that nobody in federal office shall accept a present, an emolument, which means a payment, an office or title of any kind whatever, from a king, a prince, or a foreign state. And we spent the day, again, jawboning about Hunter Biden, who has never held public office, and he's never done business with the government. And yet we have right in front of us, in front of our very eyes, mammoth corruption, unprecedented U.S. history by Donald Trump as president. And my friends don't say a single word about it. But he wants to lecture Mr. Parnas about the illegal donations he made on behalf of pro-Trump super PACs. I've noticed something interesting with the people who have finally disenthralled themselves and gotten out of the Trump cult, as Mr. Parnas puts it. People like Michael Cohen, Sarah Matthews, Cassidy Hutchinson, Alyssa Griffin. There's articles about them. There are dozens of those people, and I'd be fleeing for the exits now too. What's so fascinating to me about it is that they don't mind when these people lie for Donald Trump. Then when they get out and start telling the truth, that's when they call them liars for what they did when they worked for Donald Trump. Mr. Parnas, they're not mad that you lied and went to prison for it and did your time. They're mad that you stopped lying.
I think my friend from Florida, and I was about to comment that sooner or later you had to expect that the debate would be a rant about Donald Trump. But let's get back to the subject matter at hand, perhaps. And here's what the gentleman from Maryland said, the law professor that Thomas Jefferson would understand. But the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson signed said the Congress shall have power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased. So that's pretty clear. It's not only the question of the interests of the 700,000 roughly D.C. citizens, it is the 19 million Americans who come to this seat of government every year and are threatened by the recklessness of the D.C. Council.
I do have to correct my friend in his history, because there might be some students watching this. Thomas Jefferson never signed the Constitution. He was, of course, on a diplomatic mission when the Constitution was being signed in Philadelphia, but he did write the Declaration of Independence. So the other side says, bizarrely, that the District of Columbia Council and the mayor should be denied the authority to increase criminal sentences forthwith because they've shown no inclination to increase criminal sentences. Well, leave aside the absolute illogic of the argument, it's also false, because the District of Columbia, in the Secure D.C. Act, passed just 2 months ago, increased criminal sentences across the board, which I'm afraid my friends were completely oblivious to when they started this legislation. They weren't aware of it. The people who are claiming to be speaking for the populace of Washington, D.C. didn't know that the council had just acted to dramatically increase criminal penalties in the city. Then they deny them the right to further increase criminal penalties in the city because they say they haven't shown any inclination to do so, which of course makes no sense and is also completely false. All of this is pure political theater. It's bad political theater. Somebody decided a long time ago that it works for people who would never try to kick around their own state legislatures, their own county councils, or their own city councils to kick around the people of Washington, D.C. My friends think that they've scored some kind of huge rhetorical coup, pointing out Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, which indeed says that Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation over the district constituting the seat of government from land that is ceded by various states. Nobody on this side of the aisle, including the distinguished gentlelady from the District of Columbia, has denied that for a second. But what we have said is this is a massive assault on home rule, and it's also an embarrassing one because it cuts completely against all of the rhetoric that we're hearing from our colleagues across the aisle. I think we've made some progress in this conversation because a plain reading of this distinguished gentleman from Florida's legislation indicates that what he's telling the District of Columbia is you may never increase criminal penalties again. The only time there can be an increase in criminal penalties in the District of Columbia is if Congress does it. Unfortunately, this Congress has a hard time even keeping a speaker in place without them trying to vacate the chair and topple the speaker. This Congress, as the whole country knows, has been absolute chaos and dysfunction and disorganization from the beginning. So I don't blame the people from Washington, D.C. who sent us these letters, the mayor, the council, the attorney general of D.C. from saying, thanks, but no thanks, we'll take it from here. The people in D.C. are perfectly able to decide what criminal offenses they need in the District of Columbia and how the sentences should be set and fixed. And they've got courts in the District of Columbia. They've got a legislature, the Council of the District of Columbia, which is elected from their 8 wards and 4 at-large members and a chairman of the council, and they've got a mayor. They've got advisory neighborhood commissions. I wonder if any of my colleagues over there are active in any of the wards or advisory neighborhood commissions where they live.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to make reference to a couple other documents before I discuss the bill. First of all, our Pledge of Allegiance, which we say every day. We pledge allegiance to the Republic for which we stand, right? The flag and the Republic for which we stand. When Benjamin Franklin, after our Constitution was ratified, he talked about giving us a republic if we can keep it. And I think people should analyze those 2 little quotes and wonder why there were references to republic in both of them. In any event, it kind of bugs me when people around here don't understand that. I think it's absolutely bizarre that to this point we have been sending out census forms and not asking the first question that you would figure would pop into your head. Are you a citizen? It's kind of embarrassing it hasn't happened up to this point. We have another problem in that there's some states declaring themselves sanctuary states or some sanctuary cities in which they seem to be encouraging people to come here who really shouldn't be in the country at all under current law. So in any event, I think this is a great bill. First of all, we should, in apportioning congressional seats, take into account people who are citizens, not people who are non-citizens, many of which I assume are going to return to the country they came from. And secondly, we expect on the form, the first thing that I look, they put things on their race. Sometimes in the surveys, they put on,
time
do
has
you own a
expired.
TV or that sort of thing. So in any event, it's something that should be
time
expected.
has
I'd like
expired.
to thank the gentleman from Arizona
Yields
again
back.
for giving me the 2
Arizona
minutes.
reserved. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm about to yield to my friend, Ms. Meng from New York, but I'm inspired by the remarks of the gentleman from Wisconsin, especially about the word republic, which of course comes from res publica, the public thing. He happened upon a subject that's of a lot of interest to me because I wrote a paper about it when I was in 6th grade, the Pledge of Allegiance. It was written by a radical Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. I'm not sure if the gentleman's aware of that, on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And Reverend Bellamy, who was an abolitionist in Vermont, was concerned about the continuing salute of the Confederate battle flag in the southern states. And so he wanted to write a flag salute that would be unifying for the Union. And he wrote, "I pledge allegiance to my flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation with liberty and justice for all." And you notice what is not in there. He did not have under God. That was added in 1954 by Congress several weeks after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. But in any event, I'm not quite sure what the relevance is of the gentleman's invocation of the Republic or of Ben Franklin and the famous vignette about him saying, if you can keep it. Ben Franklin was, of course, a big supporter of immigration to the country, although he did display an anti-German bias in some of his writings. But I'll tell you a little story about Ben Franklin that might be of relevance to what the gentleman's talking about. Apparently, because I just did a tour in Philadelphia with the Ben Franklin people up there, and we learned this wonderful story. He made a loan to a friend of his for $100, and then he recorded in his diary that this gentleman he made a loan to for $100, Josiah, was always disappearing behind a tree or a building whenever Ben came along. And he finally caught up with him and he said, "Josiah, you know, I loaned you $100, and I'm wondering, am I going to be able to get my principal back, or at least the interest?" And Josiah said, "Well, Ben, look, the $100 is well invested somewhere else, so you don't have to worry about that." And Franklin said, "Well, what about the interest?" He said, "Well, I forgot to tell you that it's against my religion to pay interest, so I can't pay you the interest." So Franklin said, "You mean to tell me it's against your principal to pay me the interest, and it's against your interest to pay me the principal. And Josiah said, well, that's right. So Franklin said, well, I can see I'm not going to get either. Well, look, here our principles and our interests converge very much. The principles are set forth in the Constitution, which is we count everybody, and everybody is part of the census, and everybody is part of the reapportionment process. It's been like that since 1790. We don't need to start finger painting on the Constitution with this silly election year proposal.